Hi. One of the most effective ways and the most common ways to use plantain is to make a salve. And usually, when you're making a salve, you first infuse your oil with the plant material, which can take months, and then you heat it with a wax on a double boiler, and it's a whole process. It's not that difficult, but it is a process and it requires certain tools. And I feel like sometimes the reasons that people might not dip their toe into working with plants is because it seems so complicated because of things like that. And so if you don't have a double boiler, there's ways you can still do it. If you don't have the time to infuse it, there's ways you can infuse it more quickly, but it just takes a lot of knowledge. And just, I want to remove any obstacles or barriers to entry to try to figure out how to do this. And so I just saw this really cool way that you can make a salve without an infused oil and without a double boiler. So we're going to try it with our plantain. And I also did something that I don't ever do is I gathered today some plantain and then I put it in the oven to dehydrate it so I can create a powder with it. So I have my for herbs only coffee grinder, and I'm going to put my dried plantain. You want to make sure it's nice and crispy. Put my dried plantain into here and blend it into a powder. And yeah, I guess this is a tool that you might not have, right? A coffee grinder that you use only for herbs. And a way to get around this step is that you could buy the dried herbs that are already ground up. Though chances are you would need to grind them probably a little more finely in order to make it all the way into a powder. Or you could use a mortar and pestle. Yes, I know, another tool. But it does require that you have a powder in order for this to work. Okay, so I ground up my plantain and we're going to mix this or make this in this mason jar. You're going to want to use a heat-proof vessel, and because this is going in a very low temperature, like 270, 275 oven, but you want to make sure you're working in a heat-proof. So this is about a tablespoon of dried plantain, and it's ground up pretty fine, but there's still a few little stringy things in it here and there, which I don't mind. You could sift it if you wanted to, but it's not going to hurt it. It's just going to show up in your finished product. And then we're going to add a 1/4 cup of beeswax. And you can use a different wax if you are vegan or not wanting to work with bees. You just have to check the ratios because it's different. So that's about a 1/4 cup of beeswax, and then we're going to put a 1/2 cup of oil. You can put any oil that you want. Olive oil, avocado oil is really nice. It does not have to be an infused oil. Just straight up oil is totally fine. I happen to have some infused oil that I'm going to use just to increase the potency, and just because I have a lot of infused oils just kind of sitting around that I would like to put out into some creations. I think this is juniper. So about yeah, it smells like juniper. So that'll be nice with the plantain. So 1/2 cup of oil, all into the same cup. So your ratio of beeswax to oil is 2 parts oil to 1 part beeswax. And then I'm going to stir it up a little bit. to mix in the plantain powder. If you forget to do that, that is okay. We'll also be stirring it after we heat it. Okay, so then what we're going to do is put a lid on it, but very gently. You don't want to seal it. You want to allow the air to release. And then we're going to pop it into the oven for about an hour at 270, 275. And that's going to melt the beeswax. And if after an hour the beeswax is not melted, then leave it in for a little bit longer. So I'm gonna go pop this in the oven, and then we'll be back to see what happened, and I'll show you what you can do with it after it's kind of mixed together. Okay, hold tight. Okay, it's done. So this is warm, so I guess hot. So I want to be careful with it, but I also want to transfer it to other containers while it is warm. So you might not have other containers, right? So you could make a smaller batch of this in like a smaller mason jar or in two different ones. So you could take this and pour it into these smaller mason jars, which are handier to use for a salve, right? It's not the most convenient to keep it in here. I'm going to put it into little tins, but I realize that not everyone has little tins. So any small jar, it doesn't have to be a mason jar, right? Like if you have glass jars that you're reusing, whatever you have on hand will work. So before I pour it into the other receptacles, I'm going to give it another stir, and you can see how much darker it is now because of the powder, right? So it's kind of blending together, and the heat of having it in the oven for that long, it's not only melting the beeswax, but it's infusing the oil and the beeswax with the plantain properties. So it's a win-win, win-win. Okay, so give it a little stir and then pour it into the final receptacles. And that's it. Let's see how I do this. And again, you can make it in your final receptacle too if you want to even eliminate this step. But I want to put it in these because it's just easier to have it portable and to have in your bag, in your car, because this is an excellent first aid kit ally. You use this salve on bug bites, insect bites. It's a drying agent. And so if you can get fresh plantain when you're out in the wilds, that's your first go-to. Like if you get stung and can find it around you, which typically you can. But if not, and in the winter when you can't get access to it, the salve is the next best thing to apply onto those boo-boos. So there's still like some of the powder settled in the bottom, so I'm going to distribute it across everybody, and then I can come through as this is drying. What's it called when it's like it's like solidifying? I can come through and keep stirring it if I want to, or I can just let it solidify in these little tins. And like this is kind of wild because I harvested the plantain today and I already have the salve, which is not typically how I have done this before. I'm still a firm believer in like the slow and low, slow medicine methodology. Like I'll take this plantain that I also gathered today, let it wilt for a few days, and then infuse it in oil and let it sit for about 6 to 8 weeks. and then work with that as well. But I just wanted to share this other method that you can use, when you don't have the time to wait and you want to create something on a more immediate basis. So I'm also calling this the no excuses method, right? So as you can see, it took very little tools, although some tools still, right, like our coffee grinder, having a heat proof thing, da 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 da. But hopefully this gives you an idea of different creative ways that you can work with the plants that might fit in better with your lifestyle and your schedule. And I hope that you give it a try in one capacity or another, because this plant is so plentiful, so abundant, and so available and so useful. Like, it does so many things. And so I would love, love, love for you to get to know plantain, and create your own medicine.